I work an outside type of job. On this particular day, we were finishing up in this one section of woods. I don't know why, but this one was exceptionally creepy to me. It had nothing to do with the burned out trees or the remoteness of our location. I had been dealing with that all week and it never bothered me then or since working in this area. Anyways, this day I was somewhat away from my coworker. There were only two of us out there. We started at about 2:30 in the afternoon, and it was now about 3. My coworker and I were sitting down by this pond, taking notes and talking. Then, out of nowhere, we hear the sound of sticks breaking in the tree line to our left. It creeped me out because I was already creeped out, but I was trying to be rational. It's just a deer or an elk, it's nothing to be concerned about. Or so I tried to tell myself. But I just couldn't shake that feeling, and now, since hearing that, it felt even more ominous. Of course, my mind could have been hyping it up more than it was. However, I kept hearing whatever this was circling the tree line around us. What was weird about this is that while I kept hearing the sound of sticks breaking, my coworker heard nothing. At this point, whatever it was, I was absolutely watching us and it wanted no part of that. I was ready to get the fuck out. But my coworker kept insisting I was being paranoid. Whatever. As soon as I could, I got back in the vehicle. Too bad because we couldn't leave yet because we still had more recon to do. So we drove a little further up the road and soon we got to a point where our vehicle just won't take us any further. Shoe Leather Express it is. We walked about a quarter of a mile of the way up the road, and at this point, my skin felt like it was crawling. All the hairs on my body were standing on end, and I was over it. I trust my instincts, and paranormal or not, something just wasn't right. I moved us along as quickly as possible, and thankfully, my coworker finally relented, and we headed back towards our vehicle. My coworker was walking a little bit ahead of me when I first started hearing it. Chimes. Way off in the distance, like small bells. I strained my hearing, not quite believing that that was what was happening. Could it be my keys? No, they were in my bag. My coworker's keys? No, also in their bag. Didn't have anything metallic and loose either. All these thoughts ran through my head. I kept hearing those damn bells. At one point, I even asked my coworker if they heard anything, and par for the course, no, they actually didn't. I heard those chimes all the way down to our vehicle, and boy, was I glad to be out of there. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So a few days later, our boss comes out with us to finish up some other work farther up the road. Mind you, we can't drive in on this road. It's basically impassable in a truck with 4x4, and especially not in a passenger car. Again, Shoe Leather Express it is. So we're finished up for the day and walking back down the road. We're now 3/4 of a mile just above where my coworker and I had stopped the first time. All three of us, and I do mean all three of us at the same time, heard the sound of a vehicle engine, like someone was driving toward us. We know this is completely impossible because the road is impassable. Not only that, but the nearest road is through a dense wooded area down a ridgeline. I mean, you get the idea. It wasn't anywhere close to where we were. But we all heard it, and all of us reacted to it at the same time by stepping off the road instinctively to get out of the way. We stood there for a good 5 minutes and never saw a vehicle. We tried to laugh it off, but even my coworker, who was a skeptic, seemed put off by this. It's the end of the day, we're tired, and we're like, okay, yeah, that was weird, but it's fine. We're almost done, let's just get back to the vehicle and get out of here. Well, here's where it gets even weirder. We came down into the flat, wooded pond area, where my coworker and I had been working previously. My boss and I walking more or less in step. Coworker is just ahead of us. My boss and I had been talking and all of a sudden, they grab my arm, scream, and duck. Now, let me tell you, when I tell you I jumped, I about came out of my skin. I whipped my head around, thinking there might have been a predator, but nada. Concerned, I ask my boss if they're okay. Shaken up, clearly, my boss says they're fine. I'm doubtful, but I let it go. Then, from up ahead, I hear my coworker say, "Whoa, that's scary." And I'm thinking, great, what else can possibly be any weirder out here? The pond, which we had been at just a few days before, is now a sickly red colour. Now, completely natural, probably just an algae boom, but it still freaked me the fuck out, combined with everything else. I was like, last straw, I'm done, let's go home. So we all get to the vehicle. My boss and I are waiting for my coworker to come back after answering nature's call. I ask again if they're okay, like what happened earlier, because I've never seen them react like to anything before. They look at me dead in the eyes and say, "It felt like something flew at the back of my head. Like something was thrown at the back of my head." I believe them because no one reacts like that without some outside stimulus causing it. And no, I don't think it was a bug or a bird, because I was walking right beside them and one, saw nothing, and two, felt nothing. If there was a bug, it would have had to have flown by me, and if it was a bird, likewise. I would have seen it going in some direction away from us at the very least. Also, if it was a bug, my boss wouldn't have reacted like that. They're the type of people that think are cute, so no, definitely wouldn't be that strong of a reaction, even if it was unexpected. Needless to say, I hate that section of the woods. It's absolutely freaking creepy, even if none of this is paranormal. Which, the pond thing, while weird, is definitely natural causes. Everything else, I don't know. I mean, I know sound carries strange in the woods and mountains, but the thing I can't explain is what happened to my boss. Also, the bells. What's up with the bells? I've lived all my life in the woods and I have never, not once, heard anything that sounded like that. Last thing I forgot to mention. My boss told me that the whole way down they kept hearing whistling, which is odd because there were no birds making that type of sound when all of us were talking, not whistling. I totally believe them because I also heard something strange. But I don't know, we could have all been tripping hard on the smoke haze, lol. I'd like to hear people's thoughts, especially about the bells. My mother and I were talking about an old, overgrown cemetery on the other side of town. She thought it was awful that thousands of graves had been neglected for decades and no one cared. I agreed. I made the observation that all cemeteries, mausoleums, and crypts would eventually in time be forgotten or moved to make room for the living. It's inevitable, so why spend thousands of dollars on burials? Cremation was more feasible. Anyway, as a child, my brothers and I would go to Youngstown, Ohio, to visit with our grandma and the rest of our huge family. Every morning we had to walk the hot, gravelly, dusty country road 3 miles to our aunt's house. Grandma worked as a domestic across town. Our aunt was a simple housewife and mother. On the way to our aunt's house, we had to pass an old, overgrown, dingy cemetery. Half of the graves had collapsed, trees had pushed up some caskets, and they peeked out from under the weeds and tall grass like firewood strewn haphazardly over the eerie landscape. Sometimes fog would have rolled in over the grass and weather-beaten headstones that sagged or crashed in whichever direction the wind had blown. Needless to say, it was the kind of scene only Stephen King could have dreamed up from a nightmare. While the three of us strolled, ran, or skipped by the cemetery, groups of people dressed like costume party rejects, for the most part, stood silent in the tall grass and weeds, just watching us. Every so often, they would wave slowly or beckon me to enter the cemetery. Sometimes I would wave back, and other times I would just ignore them. Of this I am sure. No one saw them except me. My brothers never responded to them or even acknowledged them. I said nothing. There were Native Americans in full wardrobe, soldiers in full uniform, women in wedding dresses, hospital gowns, church outfits, you name it. There were businessmen, doctors, nurses, factory workers, children, women holding babies, and even a few horses, dogs, cats, pigs, and cows. None of them frightened me. I just couldn't figure out why no one else saw them. As I got older, I saw them less and less until I stopped seeing them altogether. Several years had passed, and I was then a young woman of 27 years old. My oldest brother had gotten married and added to our family by giving me a beautiful nephew. During one of our trips to Youngstown for a family reunion, my nephew had reached the fun and exciting age of 5 years old. Our daddy had passed away from cancer, and our grandma was slowly losing her battle with cancer. It was very urgent and important that every able family member show up to this reunion. We all knew it was to be Grandma's last. Though heartbroken and saddened by the gathering, we all attended and tried to just make the best of things. As I sat with Grandma under a tree, both of us trying to catch a breeze and shade ourselves from the humid July heat, as the sun beat down on the gathering with 94 degrees of absolute ugliness, we were both silent. She cleared her throat and giggled soft and sweetly. I looked at her and asked, "What are you laughing about?" Her eyes were fixed on my nephew standing across the yard, his little hands wrapped around a kite that he had no idea of how to operate, but he was anxious to attempt it. How beautiful he was. He stood staring at the two of us as if in a trance that only he understood. She giggled again and said, "That poor baby. He can see." I didn't need to ask what she meant. I automatically knew and understood. "You can see your wings beginning to spread then," was my response in code for, "You're getting ready to transition." "Take him to see your great-grandpa," she replied. In the old cemetery?" I asked nervously. "You shouldn't be afraid of your own people," she answered as if understanding that I was terrified of that place. "A lot of our family is in there, and besides, the city cleaned it up. Take him to see our people." "I'll take him tomorrow," I said, lying. I had no intention of venturing into that place, especially with a 5-year-old. "Take him now. I want you to take him now, before the sun sets. Come back and tell me what happens." Damn, it was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I only had 2 hours until the strike of creepy as hell. "Yes, ma'am." Before I could even get up, the baby sprinted across the huge yard with what seemed like an unnatural speed and said, "Can we go now, Auntie?" Freaked me out, but I kept a straight face and my composure. I informed my brother that the baby and I were going for a drive. I wanted to show him around the sleepy old town. My stomach was in knots, and I could feel my bowels churning and bubbling as I pulled up to the cemetery entrance. The weeds and tall grass had been cut down. The graves that had collapsed had been covered over with stones and boulders. The headstones that had shifted were placed upright. Still, the hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood at attention, and my whole body felt like rubber. What a coward I was. "Hi, mister," my nephew yelled, waving at what I could no longer see. "Hi, oh boy. Auntie, can I play with the little children?" His excitement would have been off the charts adorable any other time. That day, he was scaring the crap out of me. I pulled over and turned off the car. When I got out of the car, a tree branch came out of nowhere and skipped across the front hood of my car. "Wait a minute, damn it! I just bought this damn car. Don't mess with my paint job," I yelled to whomever was listening, whatever was listening. I helped my nephew out of the car seat. Before I could stop him, he took off running down the dusty, unpaved road. I didn't know where or to whom he was running to. I took off after him. He stopped in mid-step, frozen, afraid. I could see just as clearly what he was seeing. The shadow was blacker than the blackest darkness I'd ever encountered. It hovered in the air under a tree, waiting to pounce. It fluttered as if daring us to continue any further. I could feel the rage and hatred vibrating from its essence. It was pure evil. "Help us." The whisper was definitely soft, and yet panicked. I suddenly knew that this is why she had sent me here. I had to fight this thing. I had to help them, but why was the baby here? He was too little to know how to fight this thing, and I had never encountered such evil. My nephew is now 22 years old. I called him last night and asked him if he remembered our encounter in the cemetery. After he finished laughing, he said, "Auntie, I don't mess around with dead people, and I ask them to leave me alone. I remember a little bit of what happened that day and that time we went to the lake, but I don't allow them to intrude anymore. You start talking to them, and pretty soon it's a party." He's in Youngstown right now for a family reunion. I asked him if he went to the cemetery. Again, after he finished laughing, he said, "I drove past it, waved, and I'm going to avoid it at all costs." "Did you see anyone?" I persisted. "I'm not telling you one way or the other, Auntie. I'm just not doing it. I'm sorry, but I just can't do it." We stood frozen, just staring at the thing that hovered before us, evil and full of malice. It wanted to hurt us both. I wasn't going to allow it to hurt the baby, but how could I stop it? "Stay right there, Auntie. Don't let him follow us," the baby yelled to me as he took off running. Huh? What in the world was he talking about? Us? Who was us? He ran, jumping, leaping, laughing and yelling, "Bye, bye. You can go now. Bye." The kite. He held the kite back at the reunion. His little hands pressed firmly around it, his eyes fixed on Grandma and me. It wasn't about flying the kite. It was about releasing the children. He needed to know how to help them fly. His young mind put together that they could piggyback on the kite and to fly away to heaven. He was releasing them. He was using me to shield the thing from stopping them. I could feel them as they zipped by me. The thing was growing angrier and angrier. My fear turned into rage. I invoked the love and power of the Holy Spirit, Archangels Michael and Gabriel, and dared the thing to move. I dared it to challenge the angels to a fight. "Coward!" I screamed. I had never heard that sound escape my lips. "Coward! In the name of Lord God Jehovah, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit, I command you to leave this place. You are not welcome here in this holy place. Go back from where you came. Get out." The thing was beginning to fade. It let out a scream so full of rage it shook the ground beneath my feet. It was gone. I just stood there, emotionally exhausted and physically relieved. The baby walked over to me, took my hand, looked up at me sweetly, the sun shining brightly on this innocent little face, his dark brown eyes glistening with love and kindness. He lifted his other hand to point to the many souls left. They had no desire to leave. They were safe now. They were happy. This thing was gone. They could rest. As we walked towards the car, I spotted an old woman standing just inside a wooded area. She was crying. We walked over to her, and before I could ask, the baby said, "Auntie, no one knows she's here. We have to clean her bed, okay?" The old woman pointed to her weather-beaten headstone, her grave covered by leaves, overgrown brush, and branches. She was right inside the tree line, about 3 feet. Her grave hadn't been salvaged and uncovered. 4:58 p.m. Really? He wants to clean a grave now? Oh, good grief. I've got to learn to say no to that face. Good grief. I looked down at him and said, "Baby, we can do it tomorrow. It's getting late." We have to do it now, Auntie, he insisted. Ugh, fine. So I just had a manicure 2 days ago and my hair washed, conditioned and blow-dried. Sort of there would be spiders big enough to carry off a cat. Who cares about all the other critters probably lurking around in here? Why can't I say no to that face? Needless to say, we cleaned the grave off by hand in lightning speed. I broke 2 nails in the process of pulling and tugging on weeds, brush and mold. Ugh. Critters attacked from all directions. Ugh. We left just before sunset. By the time we got back to the crowd, we both looked filthy dirty and hot. Grandma just smiled. 2 weeks later, she passed away in her sleep with a smile on her face. As a teen and young adult, I lost these abilities for a while. I didn't really care about it and didn't appreciate what some have referred to as the gift. Since regaining the gift, I have often done readings for people, been able to see what people are trying to hide, and been able to help people contact loved ones on the other side. I don't like to converse with the dead as a rule, let sleeping dogs lay. However, sometimes it is necessary to bring someone peace. The first time I saw Frank, I was on my way into work at a new job. I was working in an emergency room at a small hospital that no one really came to unless they absolutely had no other choice. It was just that bad. As I walked through the ER doors, there stood this extra tall, Caucasian, blonde, blue-eyed, older gentleman, wearing a lumberjack shirt, jeans, work boots, and a hard hat. As I approached him, I could see the thin stream of blood trickling down from under the hard hat on his left brow. No doubt he had been injured while at work, but not so much he wasn't alert and oriented. I walked up to him and asked, "Have you been helped?" He didn't respond. He simply walked away from me and out the door. This scene repeated itself again the next day. The third day, I knew what he was. This time, I walked up to him and asked, "I know you're trying to talk to someone. Who is it, and what message are you trying to convey?" He looked at me as if surprised and asked, "Can you tell Marie something for me?" His eyes were sorrowful and full of hurt. I nodded my head in agreement. I started to actually feel his pain and suffering. He couldn't cross over until Marie, his daughter, received his message. His pain was so intense that it took everything I had to stifle the tears welling up in my eyes. "Can you tell her that I didn't mean it? Can you tell her that she was the light of my life and I will love her forever? Can you tell her that for me?" I nodded my head, yes. "Where is she?" I asked, looking around, to see if anyone was watching. "She'll be here in 2 days." 2 days passed. I walked in and was greeted by a new nurse. Her name was Marie. After lunch, I took her into the break room, and after getting her permission, I gave her the message. She broke down crying and hugged me so tight, my back cracked. Once she'd pulled herself together, she informed me that I had described her father. His name was Frank, and he was a construction worker. Frank had been hit in the head by a beam and was killed instantly. They'd gotten into a huge argument and hadn't spoken in years. When she was notified of his death, she felt an enormous guilt and hurt that she couldn't get over. I only saw Frank one more time after that. He waved at me from across the parking lot. The smile on his face was bigger and brighter than the noonday sun. My grandparents pioneered to Anchorage, Alaska in the early 1940s. They were both born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and that's where the rest of the family remained. Our dad was an Air Force man, and while stationed in Anchorage, he met our mother. They fell in lust, married, and the rest is history. As little ones, we'd go to Detroit on occasion to visit my mother's family. Our great-grandma, 2 aunts, and 6 cousins lived in a 2-family house. There was a 4-bedroom house upstairs and a 3-bedroom house downstairs. There was one entrance to the 2 houses, then a staircase to go either up or down. The doors inside were always open and unlocked because we were all family sharing the same home. My aunt owned the home, so our great-grandma lived downstairs with her and 2 cousins. I couldn't have been any more than 3 years old. I was upstairs alone when a tall, pretty Indian man wearing a one-piece pajama walked up to me, interrupting my tea party. He seemed nice enough, so when he sat down, being the perfect hostess, I offered him tea and butter cookies. They were my great-grandma's special homemade butter cookies, and the only time we would get any was during her tea time. Because of this, I decided to start having my own tea time. Every day after lunch, I'd go upstairs to have tea time with my special friend. We talked about everything my little mind could think of. We laughed, sipped tea, munched cookies, and just enjoyed ourselves. No one ever bothered us. This went on for quite a while. We left and came back the next summer. My special friend was there to greet me. We started our tea time routine and enjoyed ourselves a great deal. One evening at dinner, my great grandma asked, "Who were you talking to upstairs?" I didn't know his name. I'd never asked, and he'd never told me. "I don't know." She shrugged it off and continued conversing with my mother and aunts. One day during tea time, my special friend didn't show up. I walked around the house and found him sitting in a bedroom that had been closed off from the rest of the house. It looked as if they were attempting to keep it for someone. He picked me up and sat me on the bed beside him. We had our talk, and before I left, he asked if I wouldn't mind coming into his room from now on. I didn't care where we talked, so I agreed. Summer was coming to an end, and it was time for us to return to Anchorage. I was excited and afraid of starting kindergarten that year. I could hear my great-grandma and my mother yelling for me outside the door. My special friend and I sat silently staring at the door. They were panicked. They couldn't find me. The door slowly opened. They both stood in the hallway looking round. My mother was in tears. Their backs were to the door, and they slowly turned to see me sitting on the old four-poster oakwood bed, smiling. I didn't mean to scare them, and I was glad to finally introduce them to my special friend. They both jerked out of their trance-like state and rushed in. My mother snatched me up off the bed and asked, "What are you doing in Uncle George's bedroom? How did you get in here?" "My friend let me in. We were playing story time, Mommy." I was so proud of myself. "What does your friend look like, baby?" great-grandma asked. After I described him, even though very fair in complexion, my great-grandma turned pale. The colour left her face and she stumbled out the bedroom, gasping for air. My mother rushed out behind her, holding me tightly in her arms. The door slammed behind us. Uncle George died before I was born. He was a Native American. He lived in that bedroom. They said he died in that bedroom. My mother went upstairs to wake him for breakfast when she was 14 years old and found him in bed with his eyes wide open, fixed on the ceiling. We had two beloved dogs. One dog was a Doberman named Max, and the other a Siberian Husky named Sheba. Unfortunately, my Sheba died from being attacked by our neighbors, two Malamutes. I hated those dogs. They were vicious. They had no training, and they went after everyone they could. Sheba was well trained and very laid back. Max wasn't home when they attacked Sheba. The two of them would have torn those evil dogs apart. 50 years have passed, and I still miss her. Early one morning, I had to run an errand before school. I hadn't noticed the quiet as I walked by the house with the evil dogs. I just walked along singing Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I turned a corner and there they stood, teeth baring, snarling, saliva dripping and foaming around their mouths. They were rabid and I was going to get killed. There was no doubt in my mind that the two of them were seconds from tearing me apart. I stood there not knowing what to do. I could hear Max in the distance yelping in a panic and howling. He knew. The rabid dogs inched closer to me before they both leaped at the same time. I closed my eyes, my bladder released, and I screamed. I could hear them yelping in pain and screeching. They hadn't reached me. I wanted to open my eyes, but I couldn't. They screeched and yelped at what sounded like screaming. Silence. Sudden and deafening, there was silence. I felt her. I could feel Sheba lick my hand and arm the way she always did. I could feel her nose nudge me back towards the direction of home. It was Sheba. The girl's name was Susan Asaro. Susan worked at a popular neighborhood store in Detroit. Every day on the way home from school, my friends and I would stop in the store and buy a slice of deep dish pepperoni pizza to munch on our 1.5-mile hike home. Every day, she'd have 4 slices of pizza ready for us, wrapped neatly in foil and steaming hot. She always greeted us with a bright, bubbly smile and asked us how our day went. One day, while walking past my parents, bedroom, I heard her name. She was missing and her car found 3 blocks from my home in flames. Missing? Who would want to hurt her? Why? Everyone in school was worried about her. We walked about forming a posse to help search for her, but Detroit is a big city, and the adults wouldn't have allowed it. A few days passed and still no Susan. I decided to go to a friend's house after school that day. She lived in a rough part of Detroit. Abandoned houses dotted her streets with overgrown lawns that had by then turned into dead weeds averaging 3 to 4 feet tall. Winter made everything worse. The area looked war-torn and ravaged by time and elements alike. We arrived at her house to find her mother in the cramped, filthy kitchen cooking. I need a couple of onions. She snapped at the two of us gruffly. We headed back out the door into the crisp, biting winter cold and wind. We passed by the first 2 abandoned houses next to her. As we approached the third house, I could see someone standing in the back of the house through the broken windows. Hey, wait a minute. Let's go in there, I said curiously. I could see what it was, and I knew what it was. This was different. This time there was a familiarity of some kind and an urgency. She, needed for me to come in. Girl, stop. I'm not going in that house. Some bum could be in there. We stood in front of the 1-story pillbox house arguing. All doors were missing along with the windows, allowing us to see straight through the overgrown backyard. It, just slightly stood in the hallway out of the house, beckoning for me to enter. Please, I don't want to go in alone. Someone in there. She needs our help. My voice was panicked. I could hear it, and I could feel the anxiety sweeping over me. My hair stood on end, and I was beginning to feel nauseous. My friend grabbed me by the arm and yanked me across the street into the grocery store. On the way back to her house, we ran past the abandoned house with the ghost inside. We got our coats and boots off and settled into the living room to do our homework. No sooner than cracking our books open than a loud pounding came on the floor. Her mother opened the door. Detroit Police Homicide, ma'am. Do you have 2 daughters? He asked politely. Yeah, what do you want with my kids? She asked, confused. May I speak with them? Polite but insistent. She opened the door and allowed the 2 detectives to enter. My friend and I stood up to face them. Wait, she's not my daughter, she said, pointing to me. Do you girls know about Susan Asaro? He asked, not caring who I belonged to. We shook our heads in agreement. Why did you girls stop at that abandoned house 3 doors down? I had to tell the truth, but I knew it would make me a candidate for the loony bin. She told me to come in. Tracy, not her real name, wouldn't come in with me, and I wasn't going in by myself. They looked at each other in shock. Who told you to come in? He half mumbled, confused. Well, I don't know if it was Susan, because I couldn't see her face clearly, but since you're here, now I know it was her. I'm sorry. She was so nice to us. They stood staring at me as if they didn't believe me. The sound of my friends screaming and crying hysterically startled us all back from oblivion. She's been dead for a few days. She couldn't have talked to you. Do you know who put her body there? No, I just saw her. I yelled at them, irritated that they didn't understand what I meant. I want my daddy. The tears began to flow like rivers. I want my daddy. Calm down, kid. Just take it easy. We're just trying to figure out how you saw her, and she's been dead a couple days. Your Aunt Louise said, just like I can see her. That's how I could see Susan. His face turned beet red and then pale and flushed. He looked as though he would faint at any moment. His favourite Aunt Louise had passed away just after Thanksgiving. He then understood. Rest in peace, Susan Asaro. When I was 17, my family and I moved from my hometown to a coastal city, around an hour away for a change in our lives. I was so upset and angry that I had been dragged away from all of my friends, as well as being forced to start a new life in a place I'd only visited a couple of times. The house that became our new home was being sold by an elderly man's son after his mother passed away, so he needed to downsize, which is how we ended up moving there. The day after we had finally unpacked everything and settled properly into the house, we heard the plates stacked neatly in the cupboard whilst we were sat in the dining room table, as if someone was preparing us something to eat. We casually brushed it off until I started seeing the edge of a flowing dress disappearing into the kitchen, like a lady was rushing around the corner to stop being seen by me. During the first year, I would see small glimpses of her skirt nearly every 2 weeks, aside from the nights that I would have nightmares as I'd wake up just enough to feel someone lightly stroking my hair. But I'd never feel afraid. I felt safe. Nobody else in my family saw it, and they blamed my constant late night reading of ghost stories. Although I think that it's down to me being the only member of my family who hated the idea of moving to a new house. So whoever the lady might be must have felt that I needed someone to welcome me into the new home. It's been 6 years since we moved, and I'm still the only one in my family that catches glimpses of the lady's flowing dress disappearing into the kitchen. Roughly a week ago, both of my dogs started to continuously bark at the hallway leading from the front door to the kitchen. The only things out there are their food and the downstairs toilet, so I thought they might be hungry. No, that wasn't the problem. They kept barking, even after assuring them that nobody else is sad from us in the house, and nothing was out of the ordinary. Time passed, and I managed to calm them down enough for the three of us to curl up on the sofa. Whilst I was half dozing, I heard a pair of bare feet on the laminated flooring pad by me on the sofa, then walk out into the kitchen. Neither of the dogs moved, so I thought nothing of it. The next morning, I came downstairs to find a large bag of dog food, weighing 16 kilograms or roughly 35 pounds, had been dragged down the entire length of the hallway and deliberately placed against the toilet door, as if it was an attempt to keep something in there or out of there. I know for certain that I didn't move the bag of food, and my dogs are too small to move the large bag on their own. But the confusing part is, why did whoever move it place it in front of the door? This isn't the first time something in my house has been mysteriously moved, and I get the feeling that it isn't going to be the last. I could say it was almost criminal how disrespectful this ghost was. The audacity of this spirit to just scare the pants off a defenseless child, who's already feared the worst when it came to the most common noises you would hear at night. This 9-year-old kid already had enough bedtime problems. I could say with confidence that this horrifying experience was one of the main reasons why I had trouble falling asleep, until the time I became a young adult. It was a cool spring weekend night, and my family traditionally spent the Saturday evening watching a movie. Ironically, we were fans of horror movies, including myself. Those days, I saved myself from the most scary scenes by covertly looking to the other side of the room, or focusing on grabbing some popcorn. This way, the demon tooth fairy lady from Darkness Falls wouldn't haunt my dreams. After the movie was done, it was time for bed. Since I was about 5 years old and started sleeping on my own, I had trouble going to sleep. I had nights where I just couldn't take it and cried for my dad or my mom. It was very hard, and it affected everything in my life. Every day, there was always the dread that night was coming, and the closer it got to bedtime, the more anxious and depressed I got. It was also a part of a big family who grew up in the same city I was raised in. Therefore, I heard stories about my neighborhood's history growing up. Some wholesome, and some very dreadful, like the countless burnt-down buildings, private housing being built on top of graves, and the plague of violence and drugs infecting the hallways, apartments, and streets of the city. The building we lived in was a part of that history, housing tortured souls who couldn't resist the end of a needle. In the past, and even at the time, substance abusers used my building's hallways and abandoned apartments for shelter. They utilized the building's complex maze-like hallway system to conceal their narcotic appetites. This epidemic was always accompanied with death and violence. It was safe to say there was a lot of negative residual energy within my building walls, and quite possibly within my own. Bedtime came, and I was faced with a harsh reality that I will once again be under the cloak of darkness. I usually slept on the bottom bunk and my younger brother on the top. We also owned a foldable bed frame with a twin mattress for when we had guests or sleepovers. My brother agreed to sleep on the bottom bunk while I slept on the foldable mattress. This way, we were on the same level and I at least had someone close and in my field of vision. I made 2 mistakes that night, and you can say it cost me every last bit of hope that the bumps in the night were just bumps, and not the act of a ghost or worse. My first mistake was the way I laid out of the bed. I set it down to where the front of the bed, where I would lay my head, was sticking out parallel to the room door. Once I would lay down, I could see the dark outside hallway, an unwelcome vista. I didn't realize this mistake until it was too late, and my fear of basically every sinister being I was aware of at the time kicked in. As you can probably guess, my second mistake was leaving the door open. And you may think I could just turn around and keep those bad thoughts out of my head, but it wasn't that easy. My eyes were locked on the doorway. I always somehow convince myself that once I look away or close my eyes for too long, I'll be a goner before I know it. The hallway was still, silent, and dark. We lived in a duplex apartment, so my hallway had a solid banister that blocked you from falling onto the stairway that led to the first floor. That's pretty much what I was staring at all night. After about an hour, I started hearing footsteps going up the stairs. These were gentle and purposeful strides, with the only audible sound being the creaks from the bending wood. I assumed the first floor bathroom was out and my uncle wanted to use the bathroom up here. After a few steps, I expected and was basically praying that his head was going to pop up from behind the banister. It never did. It got worse because the steps never stopped either. I was confused, scared, and I tried to fight the fear with logic. We had a house cat, and it wouldn't have been out of character for him to be walking around the house at night. After another hour of this endless walking, that theory was out of the window. It was obvious to me that these were the stairs creaking from pressure because I have lived in that house for about 4 years, and I knew the sounds it made very well. My fears were confirmed when finally the thing that was making its way up and down the staircase finally showed itself. I saw a dark shadow pop up from behind the banister. The silhouette was in a distinct shape, like the top of a hat. I saw more of the figure as it made its way up more steps. I saw a head and a neck covered with a collar from a button-down shirt. It stopped at about the 4th step from the top. The figure turned its head towards me. There were no eyes, but just dark shadows overlaying the sockets where the eyes should have been. I was petrified. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move, and I couldn't look away. I was in the staring match of my life with an unknown entity. The pressure I felt was immense, as if the bed was going to give at any moment, and I was going to fold down through the middle onto the ground. I was in disbelief at what was happening. My 9-year-old brain couldn't make sense of it. I was trying to determine what beast or demon I was dealing with, based on all the scary movies I'd seen. I remember clearly that I really didn't want to be faced with Chucky, because he was the one who scared me the most. Hours passed, and my nightmare face-off was still going on. After a while, I convinced myself that it was just as scared of me, and it was waiting for me to look away, to run away or get me. I wasn't fond of losing sight of it, and not knowing where it might show up next. It was kind of like when you find a spider in your room and call your older sister or brother to kill it. But you don't want to take your eyes off it, because you don't want to end up with the worst case scenario, finding it on top of you while you're trying to sleep in bed. Light found its way into the room, and soon after the hallway. The shadow dissipated with the light, and I was finally able to move. I quickly turned on the TV and let the sounds of tiny tunes soothe me to sleep. When I woke up, I wondered who I saw last night. I couldn't move or come to any conclusion until I became familiar with the horrible stories of my building's history.